Hey guys, my name's Tesla and Themis. I'm currently a Master of Theology study student at Houston Baptist University. Today I'm going to focus on two 7th century prophets, Nahum and Zephaniah. It's kind of like comparing apples and oranges here. Nahum is more poetic and Zephaniah was kind of speaking a lot more about wrath. So, like I said, I want to talk about these two prophets. Both were prophets during the 7th century. In about 625 BC, the Assyrian nation had destroyed Israel, but it was already kind of on the downfall, beginning to crash, while the Babylonian Empire was on the rise. In 612 BC, it rose up, and so on and so forth. So we see a lot about Assyrian and Babylonian and Israel and Judah in this 7th century. Those are really the areas that are involved. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is Nahum the prophet and his message by Aaron Pinker. It is an article that I looked over and then review. So Nahum the book was for prophecies for prophecies from Nineveh. So we're thinking about the Ninevites. We know them. We're familiar with them. If you know the story of Jonah and the well, God sent him to preach to them and sent them a message. Nahum the prophet encouraged that there was basically a light at the end of the tunnel, is how Mr. Pinker explained it, which I thought was a really good metaphor to use. And this would happen when the Assyrian Empire fell, and he tried to give the people hope. They were very hopeless during this time, and so he was really giving them a message of hope with his poetic ways of relaying this message from God to them. Nahum, as a person, last week when we talked about Habakkuk, he was really having questions and conversations with God about social justices and stuff. Nahum really didn't do that. Nahum never really confronted God with questions about justices or inequalities or even morals, which is kind of interesting because during this time there was a lot of idol worshiping to Baal and just different things like that going on. So the fact that he never confronted God with this, I feel like is just important to know, because he was focused more on the hope to the people versus these questions that a lot of them in this time had. So Nahum was a prophet of what they called literary prophecy, which was kind of like a genre of poetry. What he used through his poem is very vivid for the Hebrew Bible. It gave really strong imagery to the people with its rhythmic language. The name Nahum actually meant to comfort, console, and reassure, which is important to note because that's really what he was doing to the Ninevites, right, during the time. Nahum is believed not to be written by him, but by a scribe in Jerusalem, and he showed Nahum to be an encouraging person to the people of Judah while they were being oppressed to the Assyrian. And the prophet spoke quickly about the overthrow of the tyrants of Assyria who were oppressing Judah, right, and making their lives miserable. He had a vision that stated this, and that once they were overthrown, that joy would be there, and the Assyrians would receive punishment for their evil ways. And we saw this with the Babylonians. They were punished for their evil ways. So basically, Nahum comforts the people of Judah. His message is hope. It comforts the people, right? He really focuses on how God is all-powerful and it will overcome evil. So his message is very hopeful and helpful to the people. Whereas Zephaniah, I watched the video chapter 1-2 lesson by Dr. Bob Utley, and it's mainly on the book's message and who the prophet was. Zephaniah. How do we describe him? He was not a Nahum. He was kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. He was the day of judgment is coming, or the day of Yahweh. It was kind of his whole theme for this. Zephaniah talked a lot about the earlier prophets, like the classical prophets. He focused really on the destruction of Nineveh, where Nahum we were just talking about Nahum was speaking up. And Nineveh, once again, was where the story of Jonah is based around, right? Jonah was sent to talk to the people of the Ninevites, and he ran away. He went in belly well, got spit up, ended up going back there because God called him to. Zephaniah, name means he is two different meanings, that he's the watchman, and also it could be the one that hides. So it's kind of like he is supposed to be a watchman, but also people are hiding. We see that Ninevites are kind of hiding their evil ways, right? And he was the prophet with the longest genealogy. And I think this is an important fact because it made some people think that he had to prove his Jewishness, is how Dr. Utley described it, but also it showed that he was cousin to the king Josiah. That was like the good king. We talked about him, who was in Judea. And it's important because with this royal background, we know that he was well educated and respected, even though he was just a cousin to the king. He is a prophet in Judah. Zephaniah states that Judah was going to receive the people of judgment, and this is really an intense thing that he was talking about because it's going to affect every living creature, not just human. It would be animals alike whenever the day of judgment comes. And that God tells Zephaniah that he's going to stretch out his hand, and that he was struck down all Baal's evil worshiping. And we have to remember, like, Baal's worship was for fertility. So there was a lot of paganism, worshiping, and inappropriate things going on there for this. And also child sacrificing was happening too. So definitely lots of false things were happening here. And there would be a lot of hurting whenever this day of judgment came, because God's going to search and look for everyone. In the book, it says that he has a lamp that he's going to go around looking for every last person who needs to be destroyed. And this was really important because a lot of them claimed to be worshipers of Yahweh, God, but they didn't grow in the spirit. They said that they were stagnant, and that God gave them plenty of opportunities to repent, but they never did, and they never turned to seek righteousness and to try to emulate his character. So a lot of focus on paganism here. There was a lot of avoiding of godly faith here, and ultimately Nineveh was a city that was prideful and full of idolatry worshiping, and it was going to be destroyed. Dr. Bob said, this is my final thing I'll say, Dr. Bob said the Babylonian judgment to Judah was to teach the Assyrians for what was going to happen to Israel. So it was already like foreshadowing, and it was giving an example for them to change their ways, but they didn't listen and they didn't oblige because they were like sister cities to each other, right? So God tried to teach the people through these lessons. Unfortunately, they did not pay attention and they did not listen. Both prophets are from the 7th century. One is hope. One is like the day of judgment is coming. So they're kind of like comparing apples and oranges. It's really hard to. But they both had a message for the same people of Nineveh and the Ninevites, for them to know the wrong ways. So thank you so much. We'll see you later.